The UFC has always had some interesting beefs between its fighters, and in fact, basically every fighting sport out there has had some sort of beef going on between its fighters. It's just the environment the sport is in, that's all. So, what are some of the biggest beefs the world has ever seen within the UFC or in MMA? Well, stay tuned to today's video, as today we're going to discuss the biggest UFC beefs in history revealed. First up, we have Hidehiko Yoshida versus Naoya Ogawa. The first one took place on December 31st, 2005, during the Pride Shockwave 2005 event. The result of the match between Hidehiko Yoshida and Naoya Ogawa was Yoshida beating Ogawa by armbar during the first round. Beefing doesn't always have to be a big thing in the public eye, it can be just because of what happened in previous matches, and that is the case with Hidehiko Yoshida and Naoya Ogawa. In 1994, the two met on the mats for the first time. During that match, Yoshida was much smaller than Ogawa and was set to lose the match according to basically everyone. However, Yoshida pulled something out and actually won the match against Ogawa. It was easily one of the biggest and most memorable matches in modern history, and of course in Japanese judo. Since that match in 1994, Ogawa went on to win 5 tournaments in a row and was now seen as near invincible and unbeatable. When they went on to meet in the mat for the second time over a decade later, fans were so hyped to see the matchup. There was even more mainstream interest in the match, which caused more and more people to learn about what was going on. This ended up resulting in a massive television rating and an even bigger $2 million payout for each fighter. Their beef was legendary, and their meeting on the mats once again showed just how powerful the sport can be. Next up, we have Matt Hughes versus Matt Serra. This next one took place during UFC 98 on May 23, 2009. In the end, the match came down to Matt Hughes taking down Matt Serra by unanimous decision. These two are polar opposites and really embodied the idea of complete and opposite rivals. They crossed paths during the 4th season of The Ultimate Fighter, and from then on were beefing. One is a country boy from Illinois, the other a loudmouth from New York. One a wrestler, the other a jiu-jitsu player, and one was a champion, the other a talented fighter who never quite put it together. Also, Hughes, according to Serra, is a D of a person. When most people see oil and water refusing to mix, they agree it would be best for them to go their separate ways. That was not so for producers at Spike and fight promoters at the UFC. Instead, they brought the two men together and forced them into close proximity as coaches on Season 6 of The Ultimate Fighter. As many expected, these two were rivals through and through, natural rivals almost. The season was tense, and the expectations were high for their eventual match in the octagon. Sadly, the audience had to wait a few weeks for the eventual payoff. Serra was injured, so the fight was delayed another year or so. In the end, the fight happened, and Hughes ended up taking the victory. If the fight happened earlier, it would have had way more attention, but even with the delays, it was still a very big event for the UFC and showcased one of the biggest and best beefs in UFC history. And now we have the Gracies versus Kazushi Sakuraba. This beef went on between 1999 and 2000 during Pride 8 to Pride 12. In the end, we saw Kazushi Sakuraba beat Hoyler, Hoyce, Henzo, and Ryan Gracie. He destroyed them all. Ryan Gracie was one of the people who began the UFC in the first place. His brother Hoyce was even the first UFC champion. Another brother from the family, Hickson, helped spread the art across Japan and even won 2 tournaments of his own. The Gracie family are like UFC and MMA royalty and deserve everything they have gotten. You can't scoff at fans for thinking that they were unbeatable, but someone came to destroy that facade. Only one man was up to the task, and that was Kazushi Sakuraba. The Japanese wrestler, continuing a long-standing battle, took his own brand of submission grappling into the Pride ring against the recognized masters of the mat. And, time and again, he walked away with his hand raised. In the end, Sakuraba had himself a new nickname, Gracie Hunter. More importantly, Pride Fighting Championship had a bona fide native star to propel the sport straight into the mainstream. Stay tuned, because these next few are just insane and some of the biggest beefs in UFC history. Next up, Tito Ortiz versus Chuck Liddell. When you think of a UFC or an MMA beef, Tito Ortiz versus Chuck Liddell is one of the biggest ones people think about. Even people who aren't really interested in the UFC will recognize these names and their connection to one another. This beef took place mainly between April 2nd, 2004 and December 30th, 2006 during UFC 47 to UFC 66. In the end, Chuck Liddell won both of the fights by knockout. Both of the men had lots in common, as they both had a similar rise to MMA fame. Both hailed from California, and both were standouts during their amateur wrestling days. Dana White also managed both of them at some point. Of course, Tito Ortiz was the first one to really break out in the world during the Zuffa era. He became the face of the UFC and a box office leader. Liddell needed more time to catch on, but forced himself into the world with lots of impressive wins that people loved. According to BleacherReport.com, despite Ortiz's star status, Liddell and White believed the Iceman was the better fighter. He was certainly the easier for White to deal with. Both the UFC's president and its top contender at light heavyweight wanted a shot at their their former friend in the worst way. Instead, Ortiz held out, looking to get paid if he was going to risk his position against a former training partner. Things got ugly, to the point more than a decade later, the grudge remains. Ortiz mocked Liddell's pot belly. Chuck called Tito a chicken. Then finally, they settled it with their fists. Liddell won convincingly, but once was not enough. The two met a second time in the post-Ultimate Fighter boom, becoming the first UFC fighters to earn more than 1 million pay-per-view buys. What a crazy time for the UFC. Their biggest fighters risked it all, and only one came out on top. Our penultimate beef is none other than Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir. During UFC 181 and UFC 100, we saw one of the biggest UFC beefs to ever happen. Brock Lesnar was beaten in the end by Frank Mir by submission, then Lesnar went on to beat Mir by TKO. No one really knew what to expect from Brock Lesnar during his early days in the UFC, but he quickly showed how much of a powerhouse he really was. Lesnar may have lost to Mir during their first match, but people were still very impressed with Lesnar's speed and power. He didn't want to leave that on a loss, so the rematch a year later took place. Lesnar dominated the return bout and then went on to a memorable post-fight rant, taunting Mir and even taking shots at the UFC's beer sponsor Bud Light. To have to wait 17 months to get revenge on this man, and to have to listen to him talk about what he was going to do to me, Lesnar told the press after the fight, the icing on the cake was having to be pulled off by the referee. What an insane 2 matches, and now Lesnar's still one of the biggest fighters in the world, even in WWE. And finally, we have Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva. This final beef took place between UFC 117 and UFC 148. Anderson Silva ended up beating Chael Sonnen during the final round via a submission and a TKO. At this point in their careers, Sonnen was doing super well and Silva hadn't really made much box office success, but things were about to change. His trash talk, often vile, gave their fight stakes beyond deciding who the better fighter was. Incredibly, Sonnen nearly proved himself the better man that night, beating Silva for 4 rounds before falling victim to a final round submission. It was the greatest finish in MMA history, a reminder captured for all time of what it means to be a champion. Sonnen, however, was fueled by synthetic testosterone in that fight. Suspended and disgraced, he fought his way back into contention. Once again, his patter invigorated the fight promotion. Although he didn't manage to win, Sonnen did manage to excite the fan base. UFC 148 sold nearly 1 million pay-per-views, making it one of the top 10 box office performers in UFC history, according to MMApayout.com. This was easily one of the biggest beefs in UFC history. And that's the end of the video. Just remember, this wasn't a ranked video, so let us know what other UFC beefs we should have added to the list. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with the notifications on. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.